Two thugs boarded the bus and approached an elderly black man, demanding that he give up his seat. The old man was not afraid and slapped in the face one of the thugs. They were about to attack him, but just then, a bearded man appeared. He stepped in, putting an end to their aggression and sharply rebuking them for their disrespectful behavior. Then, without further fuss, the bearded man took a seat just in front. But instead of backing down, the thugs grew even more furious. Believing the elderly man to be weak and easy prey, they taunted him and tried to pick a fight. To their surprise, he swiftly knocked them both down with just a few decisive punches. His name is Frank, a Vietnam War veteran. He never imagined his life would take such an unexpected turn. After returning from the battlefields of Vietnam, Frank's world fell into a long, motionless pause that lasted for decades. But now, everything is poised to shift in a remarkable way. Raised in a humble family, Frank spent his childhood working alongside his parents on a small farm in California. Though their life was modest, he never let it dampen his spirit. On the contrary, it was that very simplicity that taught him to cherish life's small joys, like his deep, heartfelt love for Lindsay, the girl he had always hoped would one day become his wife. But their dreams were abruptly put on hold with the outbreak of the Vietnam War. Before leaving, Frank promised Lindsay he'd return as soon as he could. However, the war dragged on far longer than anyone had expected. For 7 long years in a foreign land, Frank endured unimaginable hardships, even being captured and held as a prisoner of war. Subjected to relentless torture and brutal interrogations, he survived through sheer resilience and unbreakable will. Eventually, a serious injury forced his return home, leaving him scarred both physically and emotionally, burdened by the haunting memories of war. Once discharged from the hospital, Frank went straight to his girlfriend's house, clinging to the hope of a long-awaited reunion. But to his heartbreak, Frank discovered that Lindsay had married someone else. Crushed by the news, he channeled his pain into ambition, determined to rebuild his life. Believing his combat experience would serve him well, he applied to the police academy. However, his severe injuries led to a rejection. Undeterred, Frank refused to give up and pressed on, searching for other paths forward. Without a higher education, Frank faced rejection at every turn. He grew used to hearing the same hollow phrases, "Sorry. The position has already been filled," until hope began to fade entirely. With no doors left open, Frank was forced to rely on himself to survive. Few would have imagined that a war veteran like him would spend the next 40 years making a living by selling sausages on the street. However, fate had other plans. One ordinary day, while riding his usual bus route, Frank found himself in the middle of an unexpected incident. 2 bald men boarded the bus and began harassing an elderly black passenger. As they prepared to assault the man, Frank intervened. At first, he tried to defuse the situation with a warning, insisting he didn't want trouble. But the thugs clearly wanted a fight. Pushed past his limit by their arrogance, Frank stepped in and swiftly put them in their place. His courageous act was met with applause from the other passengers, who witnessed the quiet strength of a man long underestimated. What Frank never anticipated was that a fellow passenger had recorded the entire incident, and the video quickly went viral. Overnight, he became an internet sensation. After decades of living in quiet obscurity, Frank was suddenly known far and wide as the cool guy. His image began popping up everywhere, from graffiti murals to t-shirt prints. Even the police, when they later brought him home, treated him with warmth and respect, as if welcoming back an old friend. Reporters quickly rushed to secure an interview with the social media sensation who was causing a stir. But what truly touched Frank was the look of pride in his mother's eyes. Unfortunately, his brief moment of happiness was soon overshadowed by the loss of his mother. She passed away, leaving him a large house and her cherished dog as her final gift. Now, the only family Frank had left was his dear friend Klondike, a fellow veteran who had stood by him through life's darkest moments. With Klondike's support, Frank slowly adjusted to life in his new home. The two spent many quiet moments together, reminiscing about their military days. One day, overcome with emotion, Klondike couldn't hold back his tears and turned to Frank. "Thank you for looking after me and giving me a place to call home," he said. "You're the only family I have left, and you saved my life. I owe you everything." Together, they shared their dreams and hopes for the future. Over time, their lives began to improve, especially when Frank unexpectedly rose to local fame. Later, Klondike asked Frank to store his enigmatic flash drive in the safe. It was the first time Frank had laid eyes on the device. Once done, Klondike left the house to buy cigarettes, leaving Frank alone. However, as Klondike stepped outside, he unexpectedly crossed paths with two thugs. They demanded he hand over the flash drive, but Klondike feigned ignorance, pretending not to understand their request. Without warning, one of the thugs drew a gun and aimed it directly at his head. Remaining calm under pressure, Klondike swiftly acted, subduing both attackers and sending them crashing to the ground. But tragically, as he turned to walk away, he was shot and killed by them. The police called Frank in to identify the body. Stricken with grief over the loss of his best friend, he urged the authorities to track down those responsible for the crime. After leaving the station, Frank stepped outside to compose himself and take a drink of water. It was then that he unexpectedly ran into his neighbor. With genuine sympathy, she offered her condolences for his loss. As they spoke, she shocked him by revealing that her own brother had been murdered near the very spot where Klondike had met his end. The woman voiced her frustration, complaining that the local police had done nothing to address serious cases like this one. Troubled by her words, Frank confided in an acquaintance who worked in law enforcement. The acquaintance reassured him that the police were doing everything in their power to investigate and catch the perpetrator. However, not long after, as Frank watched the news, he was stunned to learn that another murder had taken place. A young white boy had been killed in town. What stood out to Frank was that the suspect in the new murder had been quickly apprehended, which left him feeling a deep sense of injustice and questioning the police's priorities. The following day, unable to contain his frustration, Frank went to the police station to express his dissatisfaction with the lack of progress in Klondike's case. Once again, he was met with the same response. The officers were working tirelessly. "We're doing the best we can." But that vague reassurance did little to quell Frank's mounting impatience. Eventually, Frank came to the painful realization that he couldn't rely solely on the police. Driven by a need to uncover the truth, he decided to visit the crime scene, hoping to find something others had missed. There, he uncovered three crucial pieces of evidence: a spent bullet, a necklace, and a pendant shaped like a girl. Sensing that these items could hold the key to unraveling the mystery, Frank chose to begin his investigation with the bullet. Frank rushed to the only gun store in town, determined to identify the type of gun that had fired the bullet. He was convinced that tracing the bullet's origin would bring him one step closer to uncovering the culprit. The store's advisor explained that the bullets were designed for specialized weapons, typically reserved for military or Secret Service use. He also confirmed that his store did not carry any such weapons. When the shopkeeper saw the necklace Frank had found, he immediately recognized the image of the girl on it. He explained that she was the wife of a man named Terrence, who lived just a few blocks from the store. He gave Frank directions to Terrence's house. Upon arriving, Frank was greeted by a weary young woman holding a child. During their conversation, he learned that Terrence had been absent for quite some time, leaving his wife and 3 children without his care. With a sad sigh, she confessed that she hadn't seen him in weeks. The children in the house were crying, repeatedly asking about their father. With a heavy heart, the woman finally shared that a friend of hers had recently seen Terrence at the local basketball court. She suggested that Frank go there to try and find him. Without hesitation, Frank made his way to the court. Once there, he began asking the people nearby, hoping to learn where Terrence might be. At first, the people at the basketball court were reluctant to share any information with Frank. However, when he adopted a more assertive and determined approach, they eventually revealed a lead. They mentioned someone named Ronaldo, who might have information, and provided Frank with an address nearby. Frank wasted no time and headed to the location. Upon arriving, he encountered a stranger dressed as a priest. Things took an awkward turn when one of Ronaldo's neighbors mistook Frank for a thief and raised an alarm. After hearing the neighbor's account, Frank learned that Ronaldo frequented a bar every morning. The neighbor also gave him the bar's address. The next morning, Frank went to the bar, but upon returning home, he witnessed a heartbreaking scene. In front of his house, a young couple was engaged in a heated argument. The dispute ended abruptly when the man stormed off in anger, leaving his wife, Amber, and their son, Martin, standing silently as they watched him leave. Frank invited the woman to his home to tend to the wounds on her face, inflicted by her abusive husband. After caring for her, the three of them shared a warm conversation and spent a peaceful evening together. The next morning, Frank resumed his search for clues about Ronaldo at the bar. When he entered the first floor, the crowd immediately recognized him, and their hostility was palpable. Undeterred, Frank relied on his fighting skills to push past them, eventually making his way to the second floor where Ronaldo was waiting. When Frank inquired about Terrence, Ronaldo pulled out a knife and firmly refused to reveal anything. However, after Frank knocked Ronaldo out the window, he quickly surrendered. Ronaldo then confessed that Terrence had been seeing a girl who worked at a nearby massage parlor. With this new lead, Frank felt satisfied and headed home. On his way back, he encountered his police friend, who warned him that rumors about Frank's investigation had spread across the city. In fact, the chief of police had nearly issued an arrest warrant for him. Thanks to the timely intervention of the officers, Frank narrowly avoided a bad situation. In the end, he explained that he couldn't stand by while the police remained indifferent to the death of his best friend. The police retorted, saying it was none of his concern and warning him that if he continued interfering, they would no longer offer their assistance. Without hesitation, Frank firmly replied, "I don't want your help." As soon as Frank stepped into the house, he noticed that everything inside had been ransacked. Before he could take a closer look, a tall man suddenly grabbed him from behind. The intruder demanded the flash drive, but Frank feigned confusion, pretending he had no idea what the man was talking about. In a swift move, Frank reacted, throwing the attacker out the window and sending him crashing to the ground below. Frank then visited his neighbor Martin, asking for help in examining the contents of the flash drive Klondike had entrusted to him. Inside, they found a town map, several building permits, and a contact list. Frank couldn't quite understand why his friend had been involved with these documents until he spotted a peculiar nickname, Black Panther. In that moment, a memory suddenly came rushing back to him. Frank then went to the Asian massage parlor that Ronaldo had mentioned and scheduled an appointment with Tatiana. She seemed taken aback and asked why he wanted to see her. Frank explained that he was searching for Terrence. Tatiana grew visibly nervous, and once her shift ended, she left in a hurry. Determined to find more clues, Frank followed her to her home. When he arrived, he decided to climb through the window, but just as he was about to enter, a neighbor spotted him. At first, the neighbor didn't believe Frank's claim that he was Tatiana's boyfriend and asked him to come closer so he could get a better look. But the moment he recognized Frank as the cool guy he had seen on TV, his demeanor completely shifted. "I'm a huge fan," he exclaimed with excitement. Not only did he let Frank off the hook, but he also casually mentioned that the back door to Tatiana's house was actually unlocked. Frank quietly slipped into the house and made his way upstairs, only to be stunned by the sight of Tatiana and Terrence lying in bed together. Reacting quickly, Terrence grabbed a gun and fired at Frank, but Frank dodged the shot, overpowered him, and dragged him into the kitchen. There, he forced Terrence's hand into the garbage disposal, demanding answers about Klondike's death. In agony and unable to withstand the pain, Terrence finally broke. He confessed that Klondike had been killed by his associate, Sebastian, and admitted that both of them were merely following orders from someone higher up. At first, Terrence refused to reveal who was giving the orders. But after a tense round of interrogation, he finally gave in, naming Black Panther and providing the person's location. When Frank returned home, he once again found the neighbor couple arguing, but this time, the husband was more aggressive than ever. Unable to stand by, Frank stepped in and demanded that the man leave Amber alone. Enraged, the husband lashed out, accusing his wife of having an affair with Frank. Frank swiftly restrained the husband, twisting his arm before forcing him out of the house. Grateful for his help, Amber hugged Frank and gently noted how tired he looked. She invited him to get some rest and then join her for dinner, mentioning that her son Martin would be spending the night at a friend's place. Though he didn't have much time to relax, Frank couldn't hide his excitement. He spent the afternoon preparing, meticulously choosing his sharpest suit and picking up a fresh bouquet of flowers to bring to her. Amber couldn't take her eyes off Frank, captivated by how striking he looked in his sharp new suit. The two shared a delightful dinner in the garden, surrounded by the gentle fragrance of blooming flowers, which added a warm, romantic touch to the evening. Frank seemed genuinely proud of the meal he had helped prepare, and Amber smiled, expressing how happy she was to finally cook for someone who truly appreciated it. In a quiet moment, she opened up to him, admitting that the man she had married was once kind and loving, but over time, he had changed completely, becoming someone she no longer recognized or loved. The two basked in the peaceful atmosphere, sharing an intimate conversation that brought them closer. Just as they were about to share their first kiss, the moment was unexpectedly interrupted. Martin had returned early after his friend got in trouble, canceling the sleepover. Though the romantic spark was briefly paused, Frank and Amber took it in stride, enjoying a warm and playful evening with Martin instead. As the night came to a close, Frank offered for Amber and her son to stay at his place, knowing their front door still hadn't been fixed. At last, Frank met with his trusted police friend to hand over the flash drive. He explained that the data it contained was directly connected to Klondike's death and, with a somber tone, asked his friend to look after his dog in case anything happened to him. Later, Frank made his way to a church, where he sought out a priest for confession. With a weight heavy in his voice, he admitted that he was about to do something grave, an irreversible act he knew would cross a line he couldn't come back from. That night, Frank arrived at the warehouse Terrence had mentioned. The thugs guarding the entrance immediately blocked his path, refusing to let him inside. But when Panther, the leader, heard Frank's voice, he stepped out from the shadows, his icy stare locking onto him. Without hesitation, Panther made it clear that Klondike had paid the price for daring to steal something of immense value to him. He then demanded that Frank hand over the flash drive at once. When Frank feigned ignorance about the flash drive, the thugs wasted no time, quickly binding him and strapping him into the electric chair. But Frank no longer felt fear. Having endured unimaginable pain in the past, those experiences had hardened his resolve. He remained silent, refusing to disclose anything. His unwavering determination pushed Panther to the edge of his patience. With a frustrated order, Panther instructed his men to continue with the torture and then left the room. Before departing, he dropped a chilling revelation. They knew about Amber, the woman Frank cared for, and they planned to target her, forcing Frank to pay the ultimate price. What Panther hadn't anticipated was that Frank had come prepared. In his pocket, he carried a matchbox and a daring plan. A sudden explosion rocked the warehouse, giving Frank the opening he needed to break free. Seizing the opportunity, he charged at Panther, who found himself trapped, his car destroyed and no escape route in sight. The two engaged in a fierce confrontation, their struggle intense. Amid the chaos, Panther spotted a weapon on the floor and made a desperate attempt to use it against Frank. Panther swiftly hijacked a bus, forcing the driver out and speeding off in a desperate attempt to escape. Frank, undeterred, quickly jumped onto another bus. The driver, recognizing Frank, reluctantly handed over control of the vehicle. The high-stakes chase was on. Frank closed the distance between them, but Panther, ever the schemer, found a clever way to slip through Frank's grasp. All the while, the criminal taunted Frank, insisting he'd never catch him. In a bold move, Frank took a risky chance, swerving and crashing directly into Panther's bus, sending it flipping over in a dramatic collision. Panther's vehicle collided with an oncoming train, and against all odds, both men survived. Yet Panther didn't waste a moment. He immediately fled, while Frank, despite limping from the crash, relentlessly pursued him. Along the way, Frank encountered the bald-headed men he had once humiliated, turning them into infamous figures. Now fueled by hatred, they sought revenge, plotting to shoot a new video in which they would emerge victorious. However, their plans quickly unraveled and things didn't go as they had hoped. As Panther broke into the house and confronted Amber with a knife, he never had the chance to strike when Frank suddenly burst through the door and slammed him into the wall. The fight quickly spilled outside, where Panther knocked Frank to the ground. As Panther prepared to deliver the final blow, Amber acted without hesitation, leaping onto his back and giving Frank the opportunity to recover and rejoin the fight. In the end, Frank overpowered Panther, and the neighbors, watching from their windows, couldn't help but applaud his victory. Amber stepped forward, gently asking if she could tend to his wounds just as he had done for hers. The following day, the local news broadcasted a shocking headline: "The villain strikes back." But this time, Frank didn't just take down the skinhead gang, he also uncovered one of the town's biggest corruption scandals, implicating Mayor Williams and one of the nation's most dangerous criminal organizations. Thanks to his bravery, Frank was honored with the title of Honorary Police Officer. Now, he, Amber, and Martin are living happily together.